My name is Clara Monroe. For most of my 32 years, I have lived my life as a quiet tributary, a gentle current flowing dutifully into the lives of my family. I reside in Newburyport, a small, historic city on the coast of Massachusetts, where the air smells of salt and old brick, and the gulls cry like lonely ghosts over the Merrimack River. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a restored Federalist building downtown, has always been my sanctuary, a place of quiet order amidst the gentle, persistent chaos of my family's needs. It was in this sanctuary, on a Saturday morning in early autumn, that the first tremor of a coming earthquake was felt. I had just poured my first cup of coffee, the steam mingling with the soft gray light filtering through my tall, wavy glass windows. I was watching a lone fishing boat make its way toward the mouth of the river when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. The name on the screen was Julian Croft, the kind, silver-haired realtor who had helped me find my one true escape, a small saltbox cottage on Plum Island, purchased with a small inheritance from my grandmother years ago. It was the only thing of value that was mine and mine alone. "Julian, good morning," I said, my voice still soft with sleep. "Clara, my apologies for the weekend call," he said, his tone laced with a cautious formality. "I have a rather peculiar question for you. Have you decided to sell your cottage?" My hand, holding the warm ceramic mug, froze midair. The gentle rhythm of the morning shattered. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "Of course not. Why would you ask that? There's a new listing online for a property on your street on the island. The description is nearly identical. Same square footage, same lot size, right down to the mention of the wild rose bushes by the fence." He paused. "The photographs are new, but it is unmistakably your home. It's live right now, but the contact number listed isn't yours." A sharp, cold sensation, like a drop of icy water, slid down my spine. The coffee in my mug suddenly seemed miles away. "Whose number is it?" He hesitated, and in that small gap of silence, I felt a familiar, sinking dread. "I didn't want to alarm you until I was certain," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "I ran a reverse search on the number. It belongs to a woman named Isabel Monroe. My mother." I didn't speak for a long moment. The silence in my small apartment was so dense I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant cry of a gull, the frantic beating of my own heart. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of 1,000 other moments just like this one, smaller, less audacious, but born of the same root. "I'll send you the link, Clara," Julian added, his voice gentle now. "I thought it best to check with you first before taking any other steps." "Thank you, Julian," I managed to whisper, my throat tight. After we hung up, I walked on unsteady legs to my laptop. His message was already there. I clicked the link, and my breath caught. There it was. My cottage. The weathered gray shingles, the white trim I'd painted myself one sweltering July, the small porch where I'd spent countless hours reading as the tide rolled in and out. My name was nowhere on the listing, but every other detail was exact, meticulously documented. The photos were new, taken from angles I'd never used, showcasing the interior with a cold, commercial eye. They must have gone there. They still had a key. The description was worded just close enough to sound legitimate, full of phrases like charming seaside escape and your private slice of coastal paradise. And at the bottom of the page, my mother's phone number was listed in bold, public font, as if she had every right in the world to be there. The anger hadn't hit me yet. It was still a distant storm cloud. What I felt was a hollow, rising pressure in my chest, a nauseating feeling, like standing on sacred ground and watching it crack apart beneath my feet. I set my phone down on the counter, walked to the sink, and gripped its cold edge, my knuckles turning white. I stared through the window at the quiet street below, at people walking their dogs and carrying bags from the farmer's market, their lives blissfully ordinary. My mother was trying to sell my home. The one place I had ever truly owned, the one anchor in the shifting tides of my life. I picked up my phone again, my hand trembling slightly, and I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice a symphony of forced cheerfulness. "Clara, sweetheart. What a lovely surprise. How is your weekend going? It was the voice she used when she knew she had been caught, a tone as bright and brittle as spun sugar. Why is my cottage listed for sale online? I asked. I skipped the pleasantries, the gentle dance of conversation I had been taught to perform since childhood. My voice was flat, cold, and unfamiliar even to my own ears. There was a fractional pause, just long enough for her to recalibrate. Then, in that same carefully modulated tone, she said, "Oh, you saw that." It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. "You put my property up for sale," I stated, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "Well," she began, drawing the word out as if to soften the blow that was to follow, "your father and I were talking, and we just thought, with everything going on, it would be for the best." "You're so busy with work, Clara. You hardly ever use it anymore." "That is not your decision to make," I said, my jaw locking so tightly I felt a pain shoot up toward my temple. Another pause. I could hear the faint clink of her coffee cup being set down on its saucer, the sound of her settling into her worn armchair in the sunroom of their house in Ipswich, a house whose mortgage I had been quietly helping them pay for the last 3 years. "It's for Sophie," she said finally, her voice shifting from defensive to righteous. "She and Daniel are expecting, you know. They need a proper down payment for a house. They've completely outgrown that little apartment, and with the baby coming, you know how expensive everything is these days, sweetheart. They need a head start." "You didn't ask me," I whispered, the betrayal of physical ache in my chest. "Because you would have said no," she replied, her tone now stark and plain, all pretense of gentleness stripped away. "We aren't trying to hurt you, Clara. It's family. Sophie needs help. You always help. It's what you do." I closed my eyes, picturing her face, the look of resolute certainty she wore when she believed her actions were justified by the needs of the family, which always, somehow, meant the needs of my younger sister, Sophie. "It is not yours to sell," I repeated, my voice shaking with a cold fury that was finally beginning to thaw the ice of my shock. "We're not doing anything illegal," she said quickly, a new, almost rehearsed edge to her voice. "We have copies of your driver's license, your tax forms from when we used to help you file, old power of attorney documents from when your father had his surgery. We have examples of your signature. We can manage the paperwork if that's what you're worried about." I stared at the brick wall of the building across the alley, my vision blurring. The meaning behind her words crashed over me with the force of a rogue wave. "You mean you're going to forge my name?" "It's just easier this way, darling," she said, her voice softening again, as if explaining a simple, logical truth to a distraught child. "It avoids any unpleasantness. And we know you'll understand, once you've had time to calm down. You've always been the responsible one, the strong one." She said it like a compliment, a crown she was placing on my head. Before I could form a response, I heard my father's muffled voice in the background. "Is she upset?" My mother covered the phone, but I could still hear her faint, confident reply. "It's fine, Robert. I'm handling it." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I simply pressed the red icon on the screen and placed the device back on the counter. Then I walked back to my laptop, my movements stiff and robotic, and searched for Julian Croft's number again. This time, I was the one who needed to make a plan. I didn't call Julian right away. I sat there, the cursor on my laptop blinking on an empty email draft, a rhythmic, silent metronome counting down to a decision I hadn't yet fully formed. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but my mind was a maelstrom of memories, a lifetime of moments suddenly cast in a new, harsh light. It wasn't just the cottage. It was never just one thing. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a slow, steady erosion of my boundaries, all under the guise of love and family obligation. "You're the strong one, Clara." The words echoed in my head, the family mantra they had used to gently, lovingly, back me into a corner time and time again. It was the phrase they'd used when Sophie decided, halfway through her junior year, that she desperately needed to do a semester abroad in Florence to find herself. Her scholarship didn't cover it, of course. I'd just received my first significant bonus from the architectural firm where I worked. I remember my mother's hand on my arm, her voice warm with pride. Sophie is so creative, but you're the practical one. You understand how important an experience like this is for her. I wrote the check, draining my savings, telling myself it was an investment in my sister's happiness. It was the same logic they applied when Sophie's wedding budget spiraled wildly out of control. The venue, the couture dress, the artisanal, five-tiered cake, it all added up to a sum that made my father blanch. I was the one who sat down with them at their dining room table, my own modest budget spreadsheets open on my laptop, and quietly agreed to cover the shortfall. She deserves a perfect day, my father had said, his eyes filled with a tired gratitude that I mistook for respect. You're a good daughter, Clara. The first time I agreed to help with their mortgage was supposed to be a temporary measure. My father's hours had been cut at the shipping company where he worked as a security supervisor. Just for a few months, he'd promised, until things pick up again. That was nearly 3 years ago. $800 a month. Automatically withdrawn from my account on the first of every month. A silent, steady siphoning of my own financial stability. No one ever mentioned it. Not my parents, not Sophie, and not even me. Because bringing it up would have been disruptive. It would have been selfish. I was trained to be the silent support beam, the one who bore the weight without creaking, the daughter who gave, not the one who questioned why no one ever gave back. For years, I had worn their praise like a badge of honor. To be the responsible one felt like a noble calling. I believed that doing more, giving more, sacrificing more meant that I was a good person, a loving daughter, a worthy sister. But sitting there in the sterile glow of my laptop screen, with the knowledge that they were actively planning to commit fraud, to forge my name and sell the one thing that was unequivocally mine, I saw the truth with a blinding, painful clarity. This wasn't love. It was a quietly executed hostile takeover of my life, softened by years of polite smiles, manufactured crises, and the weaponization of my own desire to be good. With a resolve that felt foreign and yet deeply right, I opened a new browser tab and logged into my online banking portal. I navigated to the automatic payments section. I found the recurring transfer to my parents' account, labeled simply monthly help. My finger hovered over the cancel button for a single, heart-stopping second. Then I clicked it. A small confirmation box appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this scheduled payment? I clicked yes. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. It was a small act, a digital keystroke, but it felt like taking my hand off a hot stove. Then I picked up my phone, took a deep, steadying breath, and called Julian Croft. He picked up on the second ring. Clara, he said, his voice laced with a gentle concern. Is everything all right? No, I said, the word clean and sharp. But I need your professional help. I want you to sell the cottage. There was a pause on his end. Are you certain, my dear? After what you've just learned? I'm certain, I said, a cold focus settling over me. And I want it done fast. As fast as is legally possible. If a buyer had their financing in order, what would be the absolute quickest we could close? Well, he mused, the professional in him taking over, if we found a cash buyer, and the title is clean, which I know yours is perhaps 10 days. 2 weeks at the outside. Do you remember that retired professor you mentioned to me last year? The one who was looking for a quiet place on the island to write. Mr. Albright? Yes, of course. A lovely gentleman. He's been searching for something just like your place for months. Lives over in Amesbury. Solid, pre-approved financing. Why do you ask? Call him, I said, my voice unwavering. Tell him it's his if he wants it. I'll sell it for $10,000 below the current market value you quoted me last spring. And Julian, there will be a significant bonus to your commission if we can have the papers signed and the sale closed before next Friday. Julian let out a low whistle. You're serious. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied. Consider it done, he said, a new energy in his voice. I'll make the call right now. After we hung up, I turned back to my laptop. I wasn't finished. Years ago, after my father's knee surgery, I'd been added to a joint savings account with my parents to help manage the bills. It was still open, still linked to my name, a backdoor to my finances I had long forgotten. I initiated the process to have my name removed, revoking their access. Then I went through every single one of my accounts, my 401k, my insurance policies, my investment portfolio, combing through the beneficiary information and access permissions, checking for any lingering threads that connected them to my financial life. Every door they had ever opened under the guise of helping, I methodically and quietly shut and locked. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. The city outside my window was dark and still. I didn't feel tired. I felt hollowed out, but in a clean way. A cold, sharp focus had settled deep within me, like a thread of steel pulled taut. They had moved in secret, laying their plans, justifying their theft with the language of love. They thought I would roll over, that I would absorb this crisis, as I had absorbed all the others. They thought wrong. I was moving faster. When Julian called me the next morning, his voice was practically buzzing. "He's in," he said without preamble. He didn't even counter. "Full market price, minus your discount." He sees it as a stroke of luck. He doesn't want to question. He wants to close as soon as the inspections can be cleared. "Do it," I said. "Send me whatever you need me to sign." The next 5 days were a blur of digital documents, encrypted emails, and hushed, efficient phone calls. I signed papers electronically from my office during my lunch break. I coordinated with Julian via text. I didn't tell anyone. Not my closest friend, not my colleagues, not even my gentle Aunt Beatrice, who would have understood, but would have also urged caution and conversation. I wasn't looking for advice. I was performing a surgical procedure on my own life, and it required a steady, solitary hand. By the following Thursday afternoon, less than a week after my mother's cheerful phone call, the deed was filed with the county. The funds were cleared and sitting in a new bank account at a completely different bank. And the little saltbox cottage on Plum Island no longer belonged to me. But it sure as hell didn't belong to them either. 2 weeks passed in an unnerving silence. No accusatory phone calls, no pleading voicemails, not even one of my mother's signature passive-aggressive texts, usually a photo of a family gathering I'd missed, captioned with a simple, guilt-inducing, "thinking of you." For a while, I allowed a sliver of hope to grow. Maybe they had seen the listing was gone and assumed their bluff had been called. Maybe they had found another, more legitimate way to fund Sophie's dream of homeownership. Maybe, just maybe, they had felt a flicker of shame and quietly abandoned their plan. Then, on a Tuesday morning, as I was reviewing blueprints at my desk, my phone rang. The caller ID was Mom. I let it buzz, the vibration a small, angry tremor against the polished wood of my desk. It stopped, then immediately started again. I took a sip of water and answered. "Hello." Her voice was a discordant shriek of panic and indignation, stripped of all its usual warmth. "Clara, what is going on? We drove up to the cottage this morning. We had a lovely couple who were interested in seeing it, and the locks have been changed. Someone changed the locks, and none of our keys will work." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, a strange, detached calm settling over me. I already knew exactly what I was going to say. I had been rehearsing it in the quiet moments of the past 2 weeks. "I know," I said. A beat of confused silence. "You know? You changed them? Why on earth would you do that?" "We have people ready to put in an offer, Clara." "It's not my house anymore, Mom," I said, my voice even and quiet. The silence that followed was profound. It stretched on for so long I thought she might have hung up. Then she laughed. It was a brittle, jarring sound, more nerve than humor. "Very funny, Clara." "That's not funny." "But seriously, the buyers are getting annoyed, and your father is absolutely furious. This is making everything so much more complicated than it needs to be." "I'm not joking," I said calmly. "I sold the house. The sale closed last Thursday. The new owners are the ones who installed the new locks." The silence stretched again, longer and deeper this time. I could picture her perfectly, standing on the sandy path leading to what was once my porch, her hand gripping her phone, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process a reality that did not align with her plans. Her plan had relied on my passivity. My swift, decisive action was a variable she had never considered. Finally, she spoke, her voice cracking. You what? You heard me. Without even telling us? The outrage in her voice was thick, as if I had committed an unspeakable betrayal. Clara, how could you do something so spiteful? I didn't do it out of spite, I said, and the truth of it resonated deep in my bones. I did it because it was mine. And I was done pretending that I owed it to you. She started to say something else, a jumble of angry, sputtering words, but I didn't wait to hear them. I pressed the red icon and set the phone down on my desk. My hand trembled for a few seconds, my body finally catching up to the adrenaline that had held me steady through the call. But then a strange, unexpected peace settled in its place. For the first time in my adult life, I had said no, and I had meant it. There was no room for negotiation. They couldn't guilt me, manipulate me, or handle me into reversing it. The deed was final. The money was already earmarked to pay off my own debt student loans I'd been chipping away at for a decade. I had acted without asking for permission, and there was no apology coming. I stood up and walked to the window of my office, looking down at the bustling street below. The world hadn't stopped. The foundation I had cracked was not the world's, but my own, or rather, the false foundation of my family. I was finally standing on solid ground. My phone lit up again. This time, the screen read Sophie. I let Sophie's call go to voicemail the first time and the second. She was persistent. By the fourth consecutive attempt, I picked up, my curiosity overriding my exhaustion. Clara? What the hell is going on? She snapped, her voice high and sharp. There was no greeting, no preamble, just pure, unadulterated fury. Mom just called me, hysterical, crying about changed locks and buyers walking away. What did you do? I sold the cottage, I said, my tone as even and measured as it had been with my mother. A beat of stunned silence. Then a disbelieving scoff. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Sophie. The house is no longer mine. You didn't even tell anyone. Her voice was rising in pitch, cracking with a frantic energy. We've been planning this for months. I've already picked out a new development in Topsfield. Daniel and I put a deposit down. I hired an interior designer to help me with the nursery theme. We told people we were moving. A cold, weary clarity washed over me. Then you shouldn't have based your entire future on something that didn't belong to you. Her breath hitched. For a moment, I thought she might actually hear me. But then she fell back on the old script, the one that had always worked before. Her voice softened, slipping into a practiced, pleading tone. You don't understand, Clara. I'm pregnant. We just needed a little help. You've always been the one who holds things together for us. Mom said you'd come around eventually. I let out a quiet, tired breath. The plea didn't land. The guilt didn't ignite. There was simply nothing left to burn. Then you and Daniel will have to figure it out, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You'll have to figure it out like the rest of us do. Her tone snapped back to its original fury in an instant. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by raw entitlement. You're being cruel. No, I said, a profound sadness welling up inside me. I'm finally being clear. There was another long, heavy silence. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. Then she muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse and hung up. I stood there, holding the silent phone, but I wasn't shaking this time. I wasn't even angry. I was just tired. So incredibly tired of being the default solution to everyone else's problems. They had built their entire plan, their future, their nursery theme, on the bedrock of my compliance. They had assumed I would fold, because I always had. They never once stopped to ask themselves what would happen if, for the first time, I didn't. The silence that filled my office after her call didn't feel like guilt. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like a door closing. Not slammed in anger, but clicked quietly, firmly shut. 2 more days passed. Then, Julian Croft called again. This time, his voice was not cheerful or efficient. It was heavy with a gravity that made my stomach twist into a knot. Clara, he said, his voice low and careful. Something has happened. The new owner, Mr. Albright, just called me. There was an incident at the cottage over the weekend. My heart hammered against my ribs. Is he all right? Was anyone hurt? He's fine, thankfully. He wasn't there. He just had a new security system installed, cameras and all. It went off around 2 in the morning on Saturday. The footage caught everything. He paused, and I braced myself. A man tried to pry open the back door with a crowbar. When that didn't work, he circled the house, trying to force the windows. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea and dreadful certainty washing over me. I knew even before he said the words. It was your father, Clara. I sank into my chair, the breath leaving my body in a ragged sigh. Of course it was. He's been arrested, Julian continued gently. Mr. Albright is a retired history professor, but his son-in-law is a state trooper. He recognized your father from the closing documents as the previous owner's next of kin and called the local police department instead of handling it himself. Said he wanted to keep things completely by the book. Thank you for telling me, Julian, I murmured. I'm sorry you were brought into this. Don't you apologize for a thing, he said firmly. I just wish I could say I was surprised. We hung up, and I sat in the humming silence of my apartment, staring at nothing. It felt like the final, inevitable scene of a tragedy I had been watching unfold my entire life. My phone rang again. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but some morbid curiosity compelled me to. Clara, she sobbed, the word choked and desperate before I could even say hello. You have to fix this. Your father, they arrested him. He was just trying to get into his own daughter's property. He didn't know it was sold, not for real. You have to call the police, call that man, tell them it's all a terrible misunderstanding. The sheer, unmitigated gall of her words struck me dumb for a moment. It's not a misunderstanding, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion at all. It's breaking and entering. He thought you were bluffing, she cried, her voice escalating into a wail. We didn't think you would actually go through with it. We thought you would come to your senses. The last thread of my patience snapped. You had an ad online. You were arranging showings with potential buyers behind my back. You were planning to forge my signature to steal my home from me. And now you're shocked that I didn't just stand by and let you do it. Don't be so cruel. He's your father. No, I said, the word falling like a stone into the chaos of her tears. He is a man who took a crowbar to someone else's home in the middle of the night. He is 64 years old. He knows the difference between right and wrong. He made that choice. You're heartless, she whispered, the accusation a final, desperate volley. No, I said softly. I'm just done. I hung up the phone and turned it off. I slid it into a drawer in my kitchen. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to explain. They hadn't misunderstood a single thing. They had known exactly what they were doing every step of the way. They just never, in their wildest dreams, imagined that the foundation they had built their lives on would finally, irrevocably, say no. It didn't take long for the news to ripple through our small, interconnected world. Mr. Albright, being a man of principle and not of vengeance, didn't press for the harshest possible charges. But my father didn't walk away untouched. The arrest, the report, the quiet humiliation, it was all official. Within a week, his employer at the shipping company found out. There was no dramatic confrontation, just a discreet meeting and a termination letter citing a violation of the company's code of conduct. The severance check was insultingly small. My mother stopped calling after that. The entire family went silent. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging my life into a quiet I hadn't known in years. A few weeks later, my Aunt Beatrice, my mother's older, far more sensible sister, reached out. She didn't lecture or take sides, she never did. She just gave me the facts, her voice laced with a weary sadness. They've burned through most of their savings, Clara, she said gently over the phone. Legal fees, paying back the deposit to Sophie's friends, and on top of it all, Sophie and Daniel have moved in with them. I almost laughed at the irony. The grand house in Topsfield had dissolved into a fantasy, and now the golden child, pregnant and married, was back in her childhood bedroom, wedged between her two unraveling parents in a house of simmering resentment. "They're not doing well," Beatrice continued. "Your mother is working more hours at the little market in town. Sophie complains constantly. And your father, well, Robert is not handling the forced retirement with any grace at all." I thanked her for letting me know, my voice polite and distant. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want them. For my entire life, they had preached the gospel of family, a doctrine that equated love with obligation and help with my own erasure. But now that the central pillar had been removed, the whole rickety structure was collapsing under its own weight. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. For years, I had labored under the belief that my role in the family was essential, that if I ever stepped away, they would fall apart. It turned out I was right. But the realization brought no satisfaction, no smug sense of being needed. It only brought a profound, quiet sense of freedom. That evening, I made dinner for myself, just a simple pasta with fresh basil from my windowsill. I put on a record, a soft, instrumental jazz album, and ate at my small dining table. I didn't feel like rescuing anyone. I didn't feel like apologizing for the space I had claimed in my own life. The next morning, I woke up without a feeling of dread for the first time in recent memory, and I opened my laptop and made my first ever therapy appointment. The first session was daunting. I sat on a comfortable but unfamiliar sofa, unsure of where to begin, my eyes fixed on a framed photograph of a windswept birch tree on the wall. Dr. Chin, a woman with kind eyes and a calming presence, didn't rush me. She simply waited, creating a space for the words to come. And they did. Haltingly at first, then in a torrent, I told her everything. The cottage, the fraudulent listing, the wedding money, the monthly mortgage payments, the crushing weight of being the strong one, the silence I had always kept because making noise felt like a betrayal. She listened without judgment, her gaze unwavering. When I finally ran out of words, my story hanging in the quiet air between us, she nodded slowly. "Clara," she said, her voice gentle but clear, "from what you've described, you weren't their daughter. You were their emergency fund." I thought I would cry. I had been bracing myself for tears for weeks. But I didn't. Instead, something inside me clicked, a sound as clean and decisive as a key turning in the right lock after years of fumbling with the wrong one. She had given it a name, not just a family problem, but a pattern, a dynamic. Financial abuse. And the label fit perfectly. I went home and sat in my living room for a long time, the late afternoon sun slanting across the floor. No TV, no music, just the steady, unobtrusive hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of the city outside my window. I looked at the space around men at large, not luxurious, but orderly, peaceful, and mine. I let the stillness sink into my bones. That night, I slept through until morning. No phone buzzing on the nightstand with a midnight crisis. No banking alerts. No heavy weight in my chest, reminding me that somewhere, someone was disappointed that I hadn't fixed their latest problem. For the first time in years, I wasn't a backup plan. I wasn't a safety net. I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. And I started to wonder, with a slow, dawning curiosity, what it might feel like to carry only my own. 7 months later, I walked through a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just outside the city, my hands tucked into the pockets of my coat. The late spring air was sweet with the scent of blooming lilacs. My eyes scanned the front yard of a small, modest bungalow. It had a garden, little more than a tidy patch of earth at the moment, but I could already picture lavender and rosemary growing there, maybe even a few tomato plants if I felt brave. The realtor unlocked the front door and let me step inside first. The hardwood floors creaked a welcome. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. There were no granite countertops or vaulted ceilings, no grand statements of modern luxury. It was just a clean slate, a quiet, sturdy space that hadn't been soaked in generations of someone else's expectations. I didn't have to call anyone to ask what they thought. I didn't need anyone's approval. 2 weeks later, the papers were signed. The house was mine. A month after that, I bought a used Subaru, something reliable and safe, with all-wheel drive for the New England winters. My old, sputtering sedan had finally given up, and for once, replacing it didn't mean a frantic recalculation of my budget, a choice between a car payment and my own savings. I paid for it in full with money I had earned and kept. There was no loan, no cosigner, no family involvement. Every month now, I set aside money. Not for emergencies manufactured by others, but for things I wanted. A weekend trip to the coast of Maine. A class on pottery I'd always wanted to take. A new mattress. My bank account was no longer a revolving door for other people's needs. It was a foundation for my own. The silence in my life used to feel heavy, fraught with unspoken obligations. Now, it feels like open air. There are no crisis calls, no guilt-laced texts, no sense of obligation tangled up in every holiday and family birthday. I wake up in my quiet house. I go to my job, where I am respected for my skill, not my pliability. I cook dinner in my own kitchen, and I go to therapy, where I continue to map the old territory of my past so I don't find myself lost there again. I make plans small, simple plans that belong only to me. No one tells me who I need to be anymore. And I have finally come to understand that freedom isn't loud or triumphant. It's not a victory march. It's the soft, steady hum of a life that belongs to no one but you.